Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I am back to have a chat with you about the entire, this teetering pile of books, the entire Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist 2025. That is quite the workout and quite frankly, enough of a workout for me this Monday morning. I'm going to be chatting to you a little bit about my overall thoughts. I'm going to be chatting through my prediction, or the 6 books that I personally really loved and would love to see on the shortlist. And then I'm going to talk to you about the 6 books that I think the judges might put on the shortlist, because they are different things. Now, I'm worried about this falling over at any point, so we are, mild peril ahead. The way that I'm going to also do this is not tell you my exact sort of order of preference, because Mum and I will be in June doing our rankings and winner predictions for both the Women's Prize for Fiction and the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction. Mum has read the non-fiction long list on her channel, which I'll link her channel down below if you want to go and check those out, and I have been vlogging reading the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. I'll link those 3 vlogs down below if you missed them and you fancy giving them a whirl. We go all over the country and off here, there and everywhere. It's really, really lovely. Anyway, the teetering pile has teetered, basically telling me to crack on and get on with this. I'm going old style. I have post-it notes with yes or no on the backs of the books. What I'm going to do is give you a little overview of the books, and then what I loved, maybe what I didn't love so much, and then whether I've decided to put them on my personal shortlist or not. I will say it was really tricky. There were 5 books that were kind of dead certs for me that I really, really, really enjoyed, and then there were 6 that I really, really liked, and that picking one out of those 6 has been really, really tricky and has changed about 3 times since I filmed a video for Patreon yesterday, where I was sort of tier ranking them, as it were, into loved, really liked enough. But overall, for any of you who want to know, I have really, really enjoyed reading the long list, and it's definitely introduced me to some debut authors who I can't wait to read more of, and also some new potential favourite authors that I can't wait to head to their backlist of. So yeah, it has been a treat overall, and 5 books that I've loved and 6 that I've really, really liked. That's pretty amazing going out of a list of 16. So without further ado, let's get cracking, and we're going to start with Good Girl by Aria Aber. Now, this was one that I was quite nervous about because it's set in Berlin, which is a city I really, really want to go to, but never really feel like I want to read about, and I don't know why that is. I did accidentally call it a book about drugging because this book is very much about drugs, and we follow 19-year-old Neela, who is dealing with the grief of the death of her mother, also dealing with being a real outsider in Berlin. Her family are Afghan and she lives in an apartment block where there are swastikas on the wall. This is a very gritty novel and really brilliantly uncomfortable in parts. I don't think I've read a book for quite some time that so viscerally shows what it is like to be other. And as a white reader, this really unsettled me, and I think that was the whole point of it. So I loved all of that about it. What I didn't love so much, I will say, is there's quite a bit of art chat in this book, and one character in particular who goes on about art a little bit too much. I mean, he's odious anyway, so maybe that was part of it. But yeah, that struggled for me. But despite all of that, is it a yes to my personal shortlist or a no? It's a yes. And this is one of those 6 books where I was just like, oh, there's something so brilliant in here. They're not perfect, but I don't believe in the perfect novel anyway. This one I ended up picking because of that uncomfortableness and what it's saying with all of that. The writing as well, absolutely stunning. So that's a yes from me. Then we have the book that I didn't read, which is Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I've talked about my reasons for not reading this. I think I talked about that in the second of my reading the Women's Prize for Fiction long list vlogs. It's quite a mouthful, that. You can find that down below. However, if this does get shortlisted, what I've decided to do is read it and talk about art versus the artist, which still makes me feel a little bit tricky because I am incredibly pro-trans rights, but I think that is what I will do, I think, if it's on the shortlist, but who knows if it will be. But if you haven't guessed, it was a no from me because I didn't read it. Then we have The Ministry of Time by Kaliane. Now, this book I actually read I feel like it was last summer, and I got to interview Kaliane, and I really, really enjoyed this book. It was sold to me as being a little bit Doctor Who-y, and that was a hook for me, because you might not think it because I don't talk about it that often, but I'm a big fan of Doctor Who, and I do like time travel books overall. It has faded for me a little bit. Would I be sad to see it on the shortlist? Absolutely not. Is it on my personal shortlist? No. And I think that might also partly be because there's been a bit of time, pun not intended, since I read it, but I did very much enjoy it when I was reading it. It's a romp with layers. I don't know, I was so involved in the romp and the whole time travel and the romance, love story, romance, whatever you want to call it, that those layers sneak up on you. That's how I put it, and I think it does that really, really brilliantly. So a great book, but just not on my personal shortlist. Neither is Somewhere Else, just giving you this one straight, because this, if you see my vlogs, I DNF'd. The writing just wasn't for me. It was incredibly repetitive, and I felt like I wasn't really getting anywhere, and yeah, there was something that just didn't quite sit with me writing style-wise, so that's a no from me. What's this about? This is about a young girl called Rosa who, when she's 5, her family are murdered in a pogrom, and then she is sent to the UK and ends up in Scotland where she's adopted, and we follow her life from there. And yeah, I did find the writing sadly not like as good as the rest, so I just ended up doing everything, because that's the thing. A lot of people said, oh, you know, it must be really hard, this is work for you reading all this. It's not at all. I've not been paid to do this or sponsored to do it or anything. I just love the Women's Prize, have for years, and so it's kind of like a little mini challenge for me. It has been tougher this year, I will say, because it is the shortest turnaround time between a long list and a short list, and I kind of, yeah, would have liked a little bit more breathing space. But anyway, moving on. And thankfully there were some short books that leads us to Crooked Seeds by Karen Jennings. Now, I hadn't read Karen Jennings before. I know she was up for the Booker for The Island, which I would definitely go and read. This is set in South Africa, and we meet Deirdre, and she is a really tricky, quite disgruntled character. I don't want to say she's unlikable, because as you read on, you sort of understand why she is like she is. She's very much on the periphery of society. She has been displaced from an old house she used to live in, and now is living in what is a former care home. She's in her 50s, she's disabled. We find out the story about that, but also the police are trying to contact her because at the place she used to live, some bodies have been found, and they think it has something to do with her brother. And I found this really dark, gritty. It's quite icky in parts, but oddly, I loved all of that about it. I thought it gave a really interesting insight into South African history. That said, sometimes I was a little bit uncertain what that history was. For me, I didn't get a full... I felt like this book was a little bit light on that, in terms of it was really alluding to stuff and to these murders, but I couldn't quite 100% work out why and what was going on in the bigger scheme, because it's very much focused on Deirdre's experience and her memories of that time, or hiding those memories. But I thought it was really, really brilliant, and I couldn't stop reading it, even though sometimes I really, really wanted to. However, it's a no from me, but if it was on the shortlist, I'd be more than happy to see it on there. So far we've got 1 yes and 4 no's. Speaking of 4, we have All Fours by Miranda July. Now, this was a wild ride. This is about a woman who is meant to be going to New York, and instead of flying, she decides that she's going to drive. However, she doesn't get really that much further than about 30 miles or so from her own house, where she ends up going to a motel, which she ends up renting for a while and redecorating, and then we follow on what's going from there. This looks at perimenopause really interestingly, and in some ways I absolutely loved this book, and in other ways I absolutely didn't. So there's a lot of quite graphic stuff going on in this book. I didn't mind that so much when I felt like it had a reason, but sometimes I felt like it was a little bit just voyeuristic and for the sake of it, and that was a shame, because I'm a big fan of things being quite extreme if they're making a point. However, if it just becomes a little bit either repetitive or it feels like it's a little bit voyeuristic, that's where I have questions about it. And I could see this being shortlisted because I think it is a very Marmite book. I happen to love Marmite. However, some parts of this book the Marmite was too strong. So it was too much for me. And that has happened to me with the crumpet in my time. Anyway, moving on from that. Because it's so Marmite, I could see it really dividing a panel. For me, personally, it's a no, but that is with the caveat that there are some bits of it that I did absolutely love. I also would be really intrigued to see Mum read this and see what she gets out of it. It would be an odd conversation to have, a little bit like when we read The Pisces by Melissa Broder, but one that I'm happy to have. Then we have Dream Hotel by Laila Lalami, who's an author I've meant to read for ages, but just not got around to, and I've been intrigued for this one ever since I saw Nathan of Nathan's Nook talk about it a while back. I'll link his channel down below. This is a book set in the not too distant future where we are so reliant on AI, and data and even dreams and what's going on in people's heads are a commodity. And we meet Sarah, who is detained, and we witness that, and that's such a tense piece of writing. But she is detained. Well, actually, when we meet her, she's, I don't want to say incarcerated or in prison, because some people describe it as a prison, some people describe it as a facility, some people call it the Dream Hotel. But basically, she's been flagged when she flies back into America for potentially having harmful thoughts to someone else that happens to be her husband. And I think Laila Lalami plays a brilliant game with us trying to work out what's gone on in the past, what's going on now, and as the book goes on, well, no, I won't spoil it for anyone. I found this utterly terrifying and utterly gripping. With the conversation around AI at the moment, this just really made me think about how much we're using it now and how far that could go, and this shows that. And yeah, terrifying, but absolutely brilliant, really propulsive. The writing at first I thought was a little bit clinical, but I think that's partly because of the sort of, not mode of the book, but sort of the tone, there we go, the tone of the book. However, you do get to know Zara more and more, and yeah, it's really interesting. It plays a lot of games with you as to who to believe, what to believe. There's reports throughout this, pieces of sort of fictionalised non-fiction and documentation. Really, really interesting. I don't know if you can guess, but it's a massive yes from me. I absolutely love this, and I really, really, really want to read more of Laila Lalami's work. Then we have The Persians by Sanam Mahloudji. And this was one that I was super duper looking forward to because Sarah Women has given it an amazing quote, and I thought would possibly be one of my absolute favourites. I did really like it. This is sort of multi-generational, but in the fact that it's quite centred around sort of the almost now or the recent past. But then through certain characters, we do go back in time. We follow 4 different women in one family. And I love the fact that this book gives voice to those women who may not have had voices. You don't hear their voices often, that's what I want to say. The different characters are brilliant. I did feel like 5 was maybe one too many, but also, whilst I loved all of them, there was one particular storyline, which is of Elizabeth, the matriarch, that really, really sort of grabbed me. And some of the writing of her parts particularly, I think are like award worthy. I found the beginning a little bit confusing, and I did mention in my vlog that if it hadn't been for the fact that I was reading this for the prize, I might have stopped at that point, because I was like, I don't know where I am, I don't know what's going on, there's too many characters, weird things are happening, what? Then you follow another character and things become a little bit more clear, and then yeah, once I read Elizabeth, that was it. I was hooked and I was off. So surprisingly, this is a no from me, but that said, I did really, really like it, and Sanam is one of the debuts that I mentioned that I really, really want to read more from. But yeah, that's a surprise to me because I thought that was going to be, and it was one of those, like I said, 6 that I couldn't quite decide. Then we have Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell, which many of you recommended to me before the long list was announced, but after I'd done my predictions. And I can totally see why you think this would be a very me book, because it has this propulsion to it, and you really care about the main character, who I should say is a woman who is in a very difficult, emotionally abusive relationship. And we spend the opening of the book at a day with the beach with her husband and her children, and it's just so tense and ugh. And then she chooses to leave and we follow. Now, I'm not going to give any more spoilers than that, but this was a book that gave me such shocking insight into what is going on if you are in that situation, and how the bureaucracy around it is sort of against you, and how, well, the situations that people find themselves in when they're displaced in their own town, city, etc. I think Roisin O'Donnell uses humour quite often brilliantly within a very dark topic. Loved all of that about it. What I didn't love so much was there is a storyline that builds sort of from about midway, I would say. Maybe you get a little inkling of it about a quarter of the way through, that kind of, for me, felt, I don't want to say saccharine, but I've just said saccharine, but it felt a little, I don't know, it didn't work for me as well, and sort of, for me, took something a little bit away. So for me, even though I absolutely loved the first, I don't know, 3/4, that sort of changed it for me a little bit. So it is a no. However, it's another one that overall I thought was pretty fantastic and will definitely be reading more of Roisin's work. Then we have A Little Trickery by Rosanna. I always want to say Rosamund Pike, the actress. It's not, it's by Rosanna Pike. And this is a historical tale set in the Tudor period, but it's a very different Tudor period than we used to get, and quite often it's around the kings and queens, or it'll be around the cities. This is set in rural Tudor times and lands, and has so many different subplots that I don't want to spoil it for anyone, because this for me was a real romp with layers, very much like The Ministry of Time. I think the fact that this was set in Tudor England, which is one of my favourite periods in history, and was quite a different take on it, really, really had me. Also, Tib, our narrator, is such a fantastic character, like so fully formed, comes to life, quirky, different, but there's so many parts of this book that also shocked me, pulled at my heartstrings. Yeah, I thought this was, well, as you can guess, I thought this was fantastic. I've heard a few people say it gets a bit long at the end. I didn't notice that at all. I was just totally in for it. So, as you may have guessed, it's a yes from me. So that's 3 yeses from me so far. Then we have Birding by Ruane, and this was a book that I'd heard mixed things about. I'd wanted to get it for ages because I'm absolutely obsessed with that cover. I mean, I love an ice cream. But also, when I heard more about it, I was like, oh, I think this could be a really me book. It's set in a crumbling old seaside town. We meet 2 different narrators. We have Lydia, who is a former pop star and is dealing with trauma. And we have Joyce, who is a woman who's never left home. She's middle-aged, she still lives with her mum. They dress the same, they collect dolls. It's all a little bit odd. And these 2 women don't know each other, but they may well pass each other in the street. And so really it's sort of seeing this place from 2 different sides, because the seaside town is a major character, but also hearing about one woman who is yearning for freedom, and another woman who has had a lot of freedom but also seen the consequences, but is also wanting to be free of trauma. I thought the writing in this was brilliant. The characters done so fantastically. I did prefer Joyce's chapters, and I would have actually just loved a book about her, if I'm honest. Lydia's I still enjoyed very much, and I don't mean to make that sound like, you know, I'm lessening a storyline of trauma, because it is visually done. Also, there is one scene in this book that I think perfectly captures Ruane's writing, where she can do the horrific, make it incredibly comic, then horrific, then comic. And all I'm going to say to any of you who've read it is The Miniature Village. That's all I need to know. Or is it Miniature Golf Course? Anyway, that to me was just cracking writing. And yeah, I romped through this. That said, is it on the shortlist for me? I'm going to say no, because, or on my personal shortlist, because of the fact that Joyce's storyline and just her chapters for me sang so much more vividly than Lydia's. Again, not to say that those sections weren't brilliant, because they were really, really well done. But just for me, if this book had been all about Joyce, it would be like an absolute winner. Then we have Amma by Saraid de Silva, and this is a book that this is another multi-generational book like the Persians, but this one is much more spread out, whereas that one is different characters reflecting at a specific time. We follow different characters through different periods of time as we meet Annie first, who has left New Zealand, come to London to find a man who she thinks is one of the most important men in her life, but has never actually met. Then we go to her mother, and that's in the 1980s, and we follow her story as she, I don't want to give anything away. And we go back again to Josephine, who is Annie's, now is she her great-grandmother or her grandmother? I think she's her grandmother. No, maybe she isn't. Anyway, I'm not here having a debate with myself. I'm saying about the book. Anyway, I have a little bit of a hazy memory, I should say, of this one because as I was reading it, Oscar, my OG cat, had gone missing and turned up in quite a state. He's absolutely fine now, but because of that, I feel like I didn't give this book the attention that it needed, and I think that this would be a book that, had I read it without all of that going on, would be a possible favourite, I should say. But anyway, we then go also back to 1950s where we meet Josephine when she's 10 and she kills her abuser, which is not a spoiler because that's on the back of the book, although it doesn't happen until about a quarter of the way in. And what I loved about this book was the way it looks at how that special bond between grandchildren and grandparents and that special love is just, I don't know, I really, yeah, that really got me as I talked about it in my vlog. And I thought the way that she writes characters was fantastic. I love the fact it was queer. The way that she writes place is so phenomenal because you travel all over the place with this book and every single place feels so real. I've not been to some of these places, but I kind of feel like I have through Amma. And yeah, I really, really, really think this is a brilliant book. Sadly, it's a no from me, but this is the one that until just before I filmed this, it was between this and Good Girl as to whether it would make my personal shortlist, because I do think it's a really cool book. I just think I was in the wrong mindset for it, which is not the book's fault or my fault really, it's just life. And that happens to us all. Then we have The Artist by Lucy Steeds, which is set in Provence in the, I want to say 1920s, but I feel like that's, no, I was bang on right, where we head to a reclusive artist's home. We are with a journalist who studied art, but he's been apparently sent to go there. But when he gets there, it turns out that he hasn't been asked for, but he soon realises that the artist's niece, Etty, has invited him. And I don't usually like books about art. This I thought was phenomenal, partly because as we read the book, you almost become a muse through one of the characters. So you're getting this double insight into the artwork by Etty, who's sort of watching the painting sometimes being painted, but also also Joseph, who is the journalist, but also the then model actually, for a piece of art. Somehow, as that painting was being done, and because of the way it's described, I could see it being painted, and I've never experienced that before. And it was the same with a painting called The Feast. I don't want to say too much more about this book other than it was a tiny bit spoiled for me because the proof gave a really big thing away in the cover, so I'm not going to tell you what that is. However, even though I sort of knew what was coming, I was really, really pleasantly surprised by it and really hooked and really gripped. It did take me a little while to get into, but overall I thought it was brilliant. And the way, like I said, I felt like I could see the paintings being painted when I'm not someone who really can visualise art in books was phenomenal. So yes, from me, absolute yes. Really, really, really loved that. Then we have Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout, which is the latest in, and I didn't realise before I read it, but actually all of her books centre around the same place. I've read all of the Lucy Barton books in order, absolutely loved them. Elizabeth Strout has become one of my favourite writers. I love the way she makes the ordinary extraordinary. Some people describe her writing as, well, I've seen a few people say it's a bit boring, a bit mundane, but I love that about it. I feel like I know these people, they're real. I can see this place that they're all at. And this book, even though I haven't read Olive Kitteridge or The Burgess Boys, which features Bob Burgess, brings together those two characters with Lucy. Olive, I think Bob a little bit, was in the previous Lucy Barton book. I always get Elizabeth Strout and Lucy Barton a bit confused because that's how vivid and amazing her books are. This, to me, a lot of people said, oh, you know, it's a book in a series and does that count? I think this could be the perfect jumping off point if you're wanting to start with Elizabeth Strout, because I hadn't read the Olive Kitteridge books, like I said. I'm now desperate to go back and read them because I found her a fantastic and fascinating, that was what I was looking for, character. But also, I really want to go and read about Bob in The Burgess Boys, and Isabel, who I didn't realise from Amy and Isabel is also in the book. So yeah, I've got so many treats ahead with Elizabeth Strout, and so have you if you've not read any of them, because I don't feel like it gives too much away about the Lucy Barton books if you've not read them, having read those myself. Yeah, for me, jumping off point, I absolutely loved it. It's a yes from me. I do think her writing is it's like getting into a warm bath, or if you don't like baths, getting into a really good rainhead shower. And ultimately, fundamentally, by Nusioba Eunice. I was intrigued for this one because it's a novel that is kind of comedy, but set around the de-radicalisation programme for ISIS brides. Now, I have seen a lot of chat about people saying that that's a subject matter that a comedy should not be written about. And my question to those people is why? Sometimes in the darkest parts of our life, we still find funny moments. We have to, otherwise we wouldn't go on. And at no point does this book make a joke of the ISIS brides. It makes a real joke and shows the the realistic farcicalness of bureaucracy within lots of the different government bodies who are trying to sort out the situation. But it really, when this book worked amazingly, it did that thing that I really, really love that I mentioned a little bit with Roisin O'Donnell, where humour, and I think the Persians did this, and this book was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. When I was laughing and then suddenly being absolutely shocked by what I read next, I think that is really powerful writing, and that is why I think you can write comedy about some of the darkest things. When I thought that this was on point with that, I thought it was fantastic. Sadly for me, the final part of the book ends up in this spat. I'm not going to give anything away, but it felt really jarring, and it left me quite disappointed, if I'm honest, because it just, I don't know, it was farcical, but to another level, and I just felt it got a little bit, not silly, but bitchy and snarky, and yeah, up to that point I was kind of on board, with a few caveats, but then that didn't work for me, so sadly it's a no from me. But I will be really interested to see what she writes next, that said. So yeah, that sounded harsh, I didn't mean it to. This is longer than I meant it to be. Last but not least, The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden, which again is a book that I'd read before The Longlist came out. I read it twice last year as Mum and I did our Booker Prize shortlist read along vlogs, parallel reads vlogs. This is on the book shortlist. I thought this book was brilliant. It's a historical novel. I feel like this has been talked about so much, I don't need to say much more, but it's a historical novel set after World War II, where we meet Isabel, who is living in her parents' house. They've both died, and her brother will one day inherit it. She's living there on her own. Well, she has a servant girl that lives with her who she believes is stealing things. One day her brother says, I need my fiance to come and stay with you. Is that okay? It's not really a question. She's going to end up there. So she moves in, and then things spiral, and the book shifts quite a bit. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I thought this was so brilliantly done and so poignant, and so also at some points really sexy in a good way, which All Fours does sometimes, but not all the time. This I thought was great sexiness. That's a dreadful term. I thought the sex in this was really sexy and perfectly done. There we go. I thought this was fab. It's a yes from me. So my personal shortlist is this series of books. These 6 books. So we have Good Girl by Aria, Aber, we have The Dream Hotel by Lalami. Try reading those the wrong way round and sideways. A Little Trickery by Rosanna, Pike, The Artist by Lucy Steeds, Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout, and Yael van der Wooden's The Safekeep. I don't think that will be the shortlist. What do I think is going to be the shortlist? Well, I'm going to have to do some black and white speedy bits because I forgot to do those in, was it my last video where I said I was going to do them and I didn't? But I need to do some fast speedy bits while I work out what I think the actual one will be. So just give me 1 second. So here we have my guess as to what will actually be on the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. I have a feeling that The Ministry of Time could be and is a real crowd pleaser, so I think all the judges might really, really enjoy that. Plus, like I said, the way it subtly brings certain subject matters and themes to the fore as it goes along with this time travel and sort of romance romp. Then we have All Fours by Miranda July. Like I said, I feel like I'm saying like I said a lot. Like I said, this is a book that I think is very Marmite, but I think if some of the judging panel love it, they'll really, really fight for it. I mean, if some people don't, then they'll really, really fight for it not to be. But yeah, I think that's the dividing one this year. Then we have Dream Hotel by Lalami. I just think, one, this is an absolute corking read that is addictive, gripping, terrifying, frightening, but really, really, well, it's a subject that's very prescient. Is that the right word? Prescient at the moment and pressing at the moment. And I think is a very much, even though it's a dystopic book, it's very much of the now. I also think, what ones have I put in this mix? I don't know, I think I've changed my mind now. Well, no, I definitely think that Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell will be on the list, just because I know how much so many people love it, and also the subject matter I think is very women's prizey. I've now changed my mind a bit, because I feel like, I'm going to say Good Girl. I was going to say The Artist, I think I'm going to say Good Girl. Yeah, I think I'm going to say Good Girl by Aria Aber because of that uncomfortableness. I should have said this one first because I'm not doing them in order, sorry. I think because of the uncomfortable nature and how powerful and needed that is, I think that could be part of it. Plus some of the writing is so beautiful. I forgot to say Aria Aber is a poet. I didn't also know, one of you kindly pointed this out, that this is her writing in her third language, which is phenomenal. Anyway, this book clearly, since reading it, has stayed with me. And even though I don't think it's perfect, and as I've said before, like I said, I don't believe there is a perfect book. I think this is going to provide lots of discussion and food for thought in a judge's room. And then we have The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden. I would love to see a couple of historical novels on the shortlist. I don't know if that'll happen. So partly I picked this because also I just think it's phenomenal. And like I said, the way it's so salacious and sapphic and wonderful, and then also so poignant and shocking and really packs a wallop. I think that could make the list. So there we are. Those are my actual predictions for what could make the shortlist. We have Good Girl by Aria Aber. We have Kaliane Bradley's The Ministry of Time, Miranda July's All Fours, The Dream Hotel by Lalami, Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell, and The Safekeep by Yael van der Wooden. Watch now on Wednesday how I have completely and utterly jinxed it for all of those books and none of them make that list. Anyway, I'm going to go. I hope you've enjoyed joining me for the journey of reading the Women's Prize Longlist 2025 for fiction, I should add. If you would like to see the blogs and you haven't, I'll link them down below. I'll also link Mum's channel so you can see her thoughts on the non-fiction long list. I'll be reading the non-fiction shortlist, like I said. I'll be very excitedly awaiting the fiction shortlist. I haven't decided if I'm going to do a reaction video or not. Let me know in the comments down below if you would like one. I think I might record one just in case, but also at the same time I am worried that maybe this is a bit, well, you might all be a bit women's prized out, and that maybe some other content should appear on the channel. But yeah, I've had fun reading it. I found, like I said, 5 books that I've absolutely loved. I found 6 books that I really, really liked. I found several debut authors that I can't wait to follow the careers of, and I found some cracking new to me authors with backlists that I can go and find out more from. Thanks as always to the Women's Prize for sending me the books. Very, very kind. Hello, it's me. Same day, different hair. I'm editing the video and I realised that I didn't say, please let me know what you think will make the shortlist for the Women's Prize for Fiction 2025. I would love to know that down below, plus any thoughts on any of the longlisted books. Naughty of me not for asking that, but now I have. I've rectified the situation. Back to past me with my longer hair and bigger beard. If you want more content from me, you can head to my Instagram, my Blue Sky, my Patreon, my wishlist, all those things down below. And I will see you in another video very, very soon. Bye.